Hello, hello. Shop-made dominoes can be super simple to make in any species, really. You can see I've got some Purple Heart, Maple, Wenge, Walnut, Padauk, Oak, right? So we're gonna take some walnut and we're gonna make some 5mm dominoes. Now, this could apply to any size that you're gonna make. So let me show you how I do it.
All right, real quick, a couple of shots. So kind of standard or typical for drawer boxes. I don't always do dovetails, and I'll admit that Purple Heart edge banding is a little loud. Yeah. And here are some exposed dominoes on these chair backs. I'll show more at the end.
If you take a look at a cross section of one of these dominoes, you can see that they don't have a true radius on the edges, right? They have this sort of a point. They have these striations. I know they're compressed. And that's all part of the design so they fit snugly, yet they have ample gluing strength. If I measure these across the width, they're about 18.7. They're a little bit bigger than the mortise because of that ridge on the edge. So if I measure this mortise, we're looking at about 18.45. Hard to center it. About 18.6, 18.5. So I'm going to shoot for about 18.5 millimeters, 18.5 millimeters. Now, this material from the lumberyard here in the States, it's going to come in at 13/16, right? Or it's about 20 millimeters. So we're plenty thick to get this width out of for this particular size. Now, of course, you'll have to adjust for the size that you're making.
So what I have here are a couple of sticks about 8 feet long or 2.5 meters, not quite 2.5 meters. And I've cut them into manageable lengths, so I cut them in thirds. They're about 32 inches long.
So I had two of them that had a significant warp. So I simply cut that in half, right? And that reduces that warp, well, in half. And so I was easily able to get one face of all of these flat by running 3 passes. That way you don't end up getting too thin. Another thing to look out for is grain direction. So I've highlighted the grain direction with chalk here on this particular piece. It comes down at this angle. And so you can see as that would run through the joiner head, the joiner cutter, that will favor the direction of cut so you don't get chip out. So you want to pay attention to that when you're using a joiner or a planer. The beauty of a comb machine is that when you run it through the joiner in the correct orientation, as you run it back through the planer, it's already in the right direction to run it through.
All right, I got to show this off. Check this out. So I made this little gear and sprocket with a chain so I could add a drill with a 3/8 drive and raise and lower the bed. Super easy and quick. Man, this stuff is fun. All right, let's run these things through. Pretty standard stuff. I'm running them one at a time until I can find an average that feeds well, and then I can run 4 at a time. And here I'm checking the target dimension, 18.5. Bam, dead on. Or 18.4. Close enough, yeah? Okay, let me show you something. I didn't do this before I ran all these pieces because it was already pretty smooth. So this is how I keep my planer bed nice and smooth. I clean it. I like using lacquer thinner and a rag, just clean it, and then go over it with maroon Scotch-Brite, right? And then I follow up with a blast of air and some of this stuff, Glide Coat, sometimes called Top Coat. Stuff is excellent. I don't really like using wax. Let me rephrase. I don't use wax ever. And the reason being is because I use top coat type finishes, and that can cause adhesion problems if you use an oil or a rub-on finish, wipe-on finish. wax is not an issue.
At this stage, we have all our pieces that are true on two faces. They're parallel and they're about 18.5 millimeters thick this direction. And then I ran an adjacent edge that is nice and true and square. So we're going to run that edge against the fence. I've got my saw set on 3/16 heavy. We want to make them a little over 5 millimeters, and we can sneak up on a perfect fit. The saw marks probably wouldn't hurt anything. You could cut these overly heavy and then run them through a drum sander or even a planer if your planer can accommodate something that thin. So lots of ways to do things.
So here I'm just making a sample cut with some scrap, whatever. My target dimension is 5 millimeters. So that odd sound is my blast gate opening and the dust collector coming on. So now that we have these figured out, they're exact. They're the right width and height, I guess you'd call it, for the Domino. And ideally, you would have a bunch of different species and just run tons of material in whatever species you want. I just used the walnut here because it's a really simple process and I was short on time.
All right, so rather quickly, I was able to get quite a few pieces. So these were 32 inches. So 3 of them makes an 8-footer. So I've got
6, 7, 10, 13, 15 pieces right there. So 15 divided by 3 per 8 foot. So 5 times 8, 40 feet. And so I cut these in half. So that was 32 inch. So 6 of these would make an 8-footer, right? Boom. So that's another 16 feet. So
56, 58, about 58 feet. Not bad, right? All right, let's see how we did. I think they're a little tight. I'd rather them be too big than too little. You can't do anything if they're too small. So they would probably work. We could run them through the drum sander, but what I'd rather do is go ahead and put a round edge on both edges, and that'll be the true test. If they fit, perfect. If they're a little tight, we can still run them through the drum sander. So let's set up the router table and round these edges. All right, here at the router table, change this a bit. Now, ideally, a router bit with this configuration would be the best, right? Especially if you could find one in metric. I've never actually looked. Not a big deal. I have this one. It's 3/32. And so with that, I should easily be able to get close to that radius. And I've noticed you just have to get close. It's not super critical. Of course, the closer you are, the better the fit. If you have a metric round over, even better, but this should work.
So of course, with this style of router bit, I want the bearing flush with the fences, right? So a few adjustments to make that happen. So nothing too tricky here, just making a sample piece. Once I like where that round over it is, we're ready to cut. Since these pieces are pretty small, it's just a good idea to use some kind of a push block. These grippers from Microjig, I believe. Yeah, they are fantastic. They grip the material well, and they're super easy to use and adjust. And no affiliation, I just like them. Now, since I have 56 feet, I want to make sure that these fit. So I round over 4 corners, right? And then one more check.
Oh man, I think we nailed it right out of the gate. Look at that. So we can run them all.
It does not take long once you get a little bit of a rhythm. Of course, a little safety stick to hold them tight and keep my fingers safe. Yeah.
All right, so we've got these all routed. Me. I've got these all routed. I'm going to cut them to length about 7/8 or 22 millimeter. Let me show you how I do that.
I decided to use this smaller chop saw because the blade has a negative hook blade on it and tends to work better. It doesn't pull the piece back and it can get sucked right into that vacuum hose.
Occasionally one gets away. So I've got a shop vac here and this dude, boom. There's a bit of a mesh or screen in there that captures these tiny pieces. So if you're cutting tiny parts, this is an excellent idea to keep these parts from ricocheting into oblivion across the shop.
Okay, now what's he doing? Well, I'm going to show you. So since these are going to be visible, I want to cut a bandsaw groove or kerf, but I don't want it to show. So these are set at about a 5-degree angle. And this little kerf is just on one end. It doesn't go all the way through. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, it will in a minute. So let me show you this jig. So this jig is actually set up here at the bandsaw, this bandsaw jig, to cut 5 millimeter dominoes and 6 millimeter dominoes. I can just simply turn it around, right? And so those mortises in those blocks of wood are angled back at about 5 degrees. And so that little kerf is only on one end of the domino. You can see it just slides in the miter slot and has a stop so I don't go too far, thusly creating these little kerfs that won't be exposed once that domino is in place. All right, so here is a good close-up shot. You can see those grooves. There's a groove on each side, and that groove is necessary. Oh, yeah, and check out this blower, this inline blower. I'll leave a description in the description. I love those things. I have them on all my air hoses. Anyway, you need those little grooves to prevent hydraulics, right? Once you put that in, it can either hydraulic back up or even crack your wood.
So I wanted to show you this. You can see this little groove. Maybe that shows up, I don't know. Little groove there. One on the other side, of course. And that's simply created by setting the blade at the table saw to 45, very shallow. Run that through, flip it over, run it through. And that'll allow for the glue to escape and prevent hydraulics when you're putting these in. Or if you don't want that groove to show, you can do it the way I just did it a while ago on the bandsaw. So, pretty big selection here. I really need to organize these. I've made these even out of alternating layers of veneers. I believe this is Paduke and maybe maple. And then sized that as a domino, but if I remember right, it didn't look all that great. It just looked like plywood, which it is. Speaking of plywood, Baltic birch also makes a very strong domino, yeah. So lots of possibilities, creating your own dominoes. I hope this video helps somebody out there. Thanks a ton for watching.
So here are a few more shots of exposed dominoes. Lots of possibilities. Here are some more chair backs with the exposed dominoes. And here you can see I used walnut sapwood, the lighter color, to tie in with that grain. And this always cracks me up. These are my original domino docks when I was using dominoes to make the domino docks. And this is my shop ladder. It's made of Baltic birch, exposed dominoes. Right? Or when building drawers, you can assemble them, then plunge all the way through to make a fantastic, strong drawer box. All right. Thanks again.